Hello and good evening, everyone. It is 5:31, so I would like to go ahead and get us started. My name is Meg Munch, and I'm the event lead for tonight's Modern in the Middle book launch. Just a reminder, all attendees will remain muted for the program, but please utilize the chat function for any and all questions. Now to get us started, it is my pleasure to introduce the principal and founder of Weiss Architects, LLC, and board chair for the Mies Society, Steve Weiss. Over to you, Steve.
Good evening, and on behalf of the Mies Society and our partners, welcome to the launch of the new book, Modern in the Middle, Chicago Houses, 1929 to 1975, a heavy new book, authored by Professor Michelangelo Sabatino of the IIT College of Architecture and eminent historian and preservationist Susan Benjamin. The Mies Society has partnered in this event with the Chicago Architecture Center and the Illinois Tech College of Architecture. Together, we are delighted to bring this program to you, roughly 500 of you, and to help launch an important and truly beautiful new publication about architecture in the Chicago region. It's very interesting. As a young architect, I participated in the design and construction of a couple of the houses included in this book, and I'm particularly pleased to see that the entire genre of Chicago area modern residences is so well covered, so well recorded, and in particular, not only by architect, but also by patron. I think it's wonderful that the entire story of these houses is recorded. The Mies Society is part of the Illinois Institute of Technology community. We're dedicated to protecting Mies's legacy as an educator and as the architect of our campus. We work to enhance his pedagogical legacy through programs such as this one, in addition to helping to preserve his buildings through membership and fundraising. And I encourage all of you to join us as members or as contributors. You can see our website and join our efforts at www.miessociety.org. And now it is a great pleasure to welcome you and to welcome Lynn Osmond, President and CEO of the Chicago Architecture Center, the largest I think architecture organization in the country, if not the planet, and a great partner in our architectural community. Welcome to all of you, and welcome, Lynn.
Thank you very much, Steve. And just before I introduce some of the people on the panel today, I'd like to just say that tomorrow starts the first day of Open House Chicago. It's the 10-day festival. We pivoted, goes from October 16th to 25th. Download the app, Open House Chicago, and it is in 22 neighborhoods, so it's seeing the outside of buildings this year, not the inside of buildings, but it's a great way to explore the city and the neighborhoods. And also because other years we have not been able to do houses. This year we can do houses, albeit the outside. So we've got the McDermott House in Glencoe, we've got Frank Lloyd Wright Homes in Oak Park, and we've got Prairie Homes in Beverly. So please go out and explore. So with that, great pleasure to introduce my dear friend, Reed Kroloff, who you all know, who's the Dean of IIT. I've known Reed for probably over 20 years, and through that, I've gone through a number of different positions with him, whether it be the Dean of Cranbrook School, Academy of Art and Art Museum in Bloomingdale, Bloomfield, I'm trying to say that, and also, of course, Dean of the Tulane University School of Architecture. He's also served as an advisor for many years to the CAC and really helped us as we developed the new center. So we're very glad that Reed is in our city and making a real difference here. So Reed, with that, I pass it to you.
Thank you, Lynn, very much. And thank you for the very kind words, nicer than necessary words. Lynn and I truly are longtime friends and collaborators. And any time that IIT can partner up with the CAC, we leap at the chance. And it's not just at events like this. We're working very hard to work on educational projects together. CAC has such a long-standing position on that, both education for young people and for tourists and experts in the field. I was leaving my office yesterday afternoon to go to a meeting, and there was a little cluster of people on a CAC tour with their signature jackets and hats, and it was just great to see them out there. So I too want to encourage everybody to take advantage of Open House this year in its new format. And actually, I think a really accessible format. It's traveling right from your own chair to lots of places around the city, and then an opportunity to actually get out and go stretch your legs. So Open House is a fantastic resource, and it's here for all of us. So do take advantage of it over the next 10 days while it's running. I also want to thank all the folks at the Mies van der Rohe Society, who are the co-sponsors tonight, and our partners at IIT. They support us in everything we do by raising money to sustain our legacy, our physical legacy, and the pedagogical legacy that we work on in the Architecture College as well. This is an evening of friends. And so we're delighted to have all of you with us today, more than 200 on the call already, and continuing to grow as we sit here. So I'm delighted. I also want to thank and welcome our two co-authors who've been introduced already, and our special guests this evening, Margaret McCurry, an architect. These are in alphabetical order. Margaret McCurry, an architect here in Chicago, long-term partner in the firm Tigerman McCurry Architects, and my next door neighbor, which to me is a particular pleasure. And Jeanne Moutoussamy-Ashe, who is a nationally renowned photographer, who comes to us tonight, I think from New York City. Where are you tonight, Jeanne? Oh, you're on mute.
South Kent, Connecticut. Sorry about that.
Okay, Connecticut, nearby, tri-state area. Joins us from Connecticut, and we're delighted to have you both with us tonight. And then also with Lynn tonight is Michael Wood from the CAC, Chicago Architecture Center, who will be another one of the hosts this evening later, and Cynthia Vranas Olsen, who is with IIT and the Mies van der Rohe Society, and helps us find many of these wonderful opportunities. So we've got a great group, and we want to start right away because we want to hear mostly from the authors of the book and our two guests from Jeanne and Margaret about their experiences in these wonderful houses. And so I'm going to introduce you first to Michelangelo Sabatino. Professor Sabatino has been at IIT for 6 years, Michelangelo, 5 years, and came here from stints at many universities, notably the University of Houston, which has a great architecture college, and Harvard. Before that, he's trained in Canada and in Italy, where he also did advanced degrees in both countries, finishing, I think, his studies at the University of Toronto, where he received his PhD. He is a noted historian, and this year, I don't know how exactly, but in the last 12 months, he has kicked out no less than 4 books. And these are not little pamphlets. They're books like we're looking at tonight with Modern in the Middle. It's an exceptional record. He preceded me in the Dean's Chair at IIT, and currently runs our PhD program and starts to train, where he helps train lots of young, soon-to-be Michelangelos. So please help me welcome Michelangelo Sabatino.
Thank you, Reed. Good evening to all of our guests from Chicago and all over the world. And thank you, Reed. With this evening's densely packed program, please consider this brief introduction to A Modern in the Middle, Chicago Houses, 1929 to 75, more of an appetizer than a multi-course meal. Since this is the first public launch of the book, I would like to express a collective thank you to all those people, institutions who made our research and writing possible. To all the commissioning clients and subsequent owners who are here this evening, I want you to know that we greatly appreciate your stewardship of your modern houses. A special shout out goes to Fred Eichner for generously underwriting the book, along with the John Vinci Distinguished Research Fellowship that supports my research, as well as IIT's PhD program in architecture. Friends and collaborators Jim McDonough and Brad White at Alphawood graciously did the behind-the-scenes work. Zurich Esposito and the AIA Chicago Foundation Board provided generous institutional support from the get-go. In addition to my co-author, Susan Benjamin, who you will get to meet shortly, I wish to express thanks to SAH's Executive Director, Pauline Saliga, for contributing a foreword to the book, and to my partner, Serge Ambrose, for co-authoring the preservation essay, as well as helping me with all sorts of research-related tasks. And now to the book. You're all advised to take good notes because a quiz will follow, and I am a hard grader. The title, Modern in the Middle, assumes 3 layers of meaning. The most obvious reference to middle relates to Chicago's geographical location in the US. Additionally, the clients who commissioned the modern houses generally tended to be middle and upper middle class professionals who identified with progressive values. Finally, while the chronological arc of our book starts with the late 1920s and continues to the mid-1970s, the 30s through 60s, typically associated with mid-century years, do indeed cover a substantial period. Next. Although the Roby and the Farnsworth houses seen here were designed with different approaches to materials and site, together they established Chicago and surrounding cities and villages as a laboratory for innovation in residential architecture. Yet, as the contents of our book reveal, there are many more protagonists in this multifaceted Chicagoland story than a handful of iconic houses. Next. The network of Chicagoland neighborhoods, cities, and villages discussed in our book are linked together by train and automobiles. Just as the designs of modern houses differed, so too did the social fabric of these places. What they share in common is the fact that architects and their adventurous clients introduced modern houses in communities where none were previously found. Next. In many ways, the genesis of this book can be traced back to the 1976 Chicago Architects Exhibition and accompanying catalog by Stuart Cohen and Stanley Tigerman. Although Stanley sadly is no longer with us, Stuart Cohen is in our midst, and I hope he's on the other side of the screen listening. Hi, Stuart. Hosted in the lobby of the Time Life building, designed by Harry Mies, this exhibition served as a catalyst for questioning prevailing narratives about architectural traditions. Chicago Architects was meant as a counter to the exhibition, 100 Years of Architecture in Chicago, being held simultaneously at the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago in its then nearby location. And we see the MCA and the Time Life building together, and so they were in walking distance from each other. Next. One of the first houses presented in the book is the Irene Tipler and Paul McCurry house of 1935 in the Southside Beverly neighborhood of Chicago. It was designed by Paul McCurry nearly a decade after graduating from Armour Institute of Technology in 1928. In 1940, Armour was renamed Illinois Institute of Technology. The architect, Margaret McCurry, who you will hear from later this evening, is seen here on a pony in front of her house, looking fabulous. Next. The Dr. Aaron and Lucille Gottschalk Heimbach house, completed in 1939 in the city of Blue Island, south of Chicago, is one of the handful of single-family houses designed by Bertrand Goldberg. Many of the historic black and white photographs featured in Modern in the Middle, including those of the Heimbach house, were taken by Hedrick Blessing. Next. The Mina Green and Hugh Duncan house of 1941 was designed by George Fred Keck for the Southside village of Flossmoor. Just after it was completed, Keck, who was teaching at the Institute of Design before it merged with IIT in 1949, convinced Libby Owens Ford and IIT to undertake a year-long study on how the sun could contribute additional thermal energy to the house's gas-fired hot water radiant heating floor. To prove this point of how efficient the house was, you see Mina with a short sleeve shirt while Hugh is outside in the cold. Maybe he had done something to make her angry that day. Next, textile designer Ben Rose and his wife, Frances Landrum, a weaver and his business partner, selected A. James Spire, Mies's first graduate student, to design their house in Highland Park. David Haid, another talented IIT grad, later designed on the same site the auto pavilion made famous by John Hughes's 1986 film, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Next. Architect John Warren Moutoussamy was part of a wave of veterans on the GI Bill who graduated from IIT. A few years after graduation in 1948, he designed a one-story modernist house in the Southside neighborhood of Chatham for his spouse, Elizabeth Hunt, and their children. On the left, you see Moutoussamy with his wife in a photo taken by one of their daughters, Jeanne Moutoussamy-Ashe, who went on to become a professional photographer. We are fortunate that Jeanne will be joining us shortly with memories of growing up in the house. To the right is an article published in the June 1971 issue of Ebony, dedicated to Black architects. Moutoussamy is seen against the backdrop of Theodore K. Lawless Gardens here in Chicago, designed by his firm, Dubin, Black, and Moutoussamy. Next. Commissioned by the Chinese-American ophthalmologist, Dr. Liao, and his spouse, Ming Yang, this two-story pre-stressed concrete house is sited on a wooded lot across the historic Olympia Fields Country Club. Y.C. Wong, as he is generally known, earned an MS from IIT in 1951, and like his client, Liao, immigrated to America from China. Take note in the photograph to the right of the traditional Chinese horseshoe chairs placed next to the modernist sofas. Next. This one-story house designed in Evanston by David Haid for his family with Sheila Ademan, his spouse at the time, is set among a block of Victorian-era houses located within walking distance to Lake Michigan. The award-winning house was realized after Haid sold his adjacent house to design a new and decidedly compact one on the side yard of his former residence. Next. The Free Arc House was designed for a relatively small lot in Riverside, a village in Chicago's western suburbs, for which Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux designed the general plan in 1869. This modern house was begun in 1971 by Lawrence Kenney and John Vinci and completed in 75. Vinci stated, "From the house I learned that you don't have to follow Mies religiously," end quote. Next. In addition to the introductions and the 53 case studies, Modern in the Middle includes a coda that provides an overview of other significant houses designed after 1975 during a period of anti-modernism known as postmodernism. The steel and glass house for David Mietis, completed in 1981, was designed by IIT-trained architects Ron Crick and Keith Olson, and is located on a former urban renewal site just south of Lincoln Park. Next. Architect David Hovey, who graduated from IIT and was a former faculty member here, went on to establish the award-winning design build firm Optima. He designed his first house, the Eileen Sheehan and David Hovey House in Winnetka in 1982. This house, like a number of subsequent ones, experimented with the economy of prefabricated steel construction, painted white here, while offsetting a machine-age appearance with the addition of playful color accents and signature castellated beams. Next. Continuing the modern trajectory in most recent years is Tadao Ando's Fred Eichner and Ken Lee House of 1997. It creates an oasis of tranquility in the otherwise bustling neighborhood of Lincoln Park. In 2018, the Wrightwood 659 exhibition space, its next door neighbor, also designed by Tadao Ando, opened to critical acclaim. Currently on view at Wrightwood 659 is an exhibition on the work of pioneering architect Balkrishna Doshi. Next. Finally, as evidence that my partner, Serge Ambrose, and I talk the talk and walk the walk, is this modern house. For the past 4 years, Serge and I have been working on the preservation and renovation of the Francis J. and Silva Vala Benda house, designed by architect Winston Elting for Riverside in 1939. Next. Serge, who you see hanging off the ladder next to me, took the lead on the preservation renovation of the house, with me providing the historical research and occasionally even some of the grunt labor. Although the process has required equal doses of perseverance, patience, and a bit of obsessive folly, it has proven a worthwhile endeavor, and we encourage others to take on similar challenges. Thank you. At this point, having focused on IIT and Mies, I will pass on the baton to my co-author, Susan Benjamin, who will focus on the contributions of Frank Lloyd Wright. Susan is an architectural historian with a career that spans over 40 years in a broad variety of historic preservation activities. She co-authored 2 books with architect Stuart Cohen for Acanthus Press: North Shore, Chicago, Houses of the Lakefront Suburbs 1890 to 1940 in 2004, and Great Houses of Chicago 1871 to 1921. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. It's certainly a pleasure to be here and share the numerous years of research I've done on this subject with all of you. I want to add another middle, because in addition to the middle of the country and the professional middle class clients who are generally the owners of these homes, there's another middle ground, and that's between the gentlemen that I have described as the giants in the room. They are the masters who impacted practically every architect of note. After they, things changed. This is a photograph of Frank Lloyd Wright at Taliesin, nestled in his surroundings, and of course Mies. After Frank Lloyd Wright reinvented himself, which he tended to do quite often, and in 1936 to create the Usonian House, and after Mies van der Rohe arrived at IIT at Armour in 1938, there was a great impact of these men on residential architecture. They were embraced, they were sometimes rejected, but they were seldom ignored. Next, please. They had great respect for one another, and it's very interesting that although Le Corbusier called Wright and wanted to meet with him, he was rudely turned down. Gropius was rudely turned down, and when asked by Mies van der Rohe if he could come visit, he said, "Sure, bring him up," and that's indeed what happened. When Mies was on his way to Jackson Hole to designing a house for Stanley Reeser and his wife, he stopped at Taliesin to visit with him. He was brought up there by Bud Goldberg, who had worked for Mies in 1933 when he closed the Bauhaus and spoke German. And next slide, please. And what was supposed to be a day's visit, and I assume he had a day's worth of laundry, and who knows what happened then, he stayed for 4 days. And on the way back, Frank Lloyd Wright took him to visit Johnson's Wax, which was under construction. And it was an experience that was much enjoyed by all. And when they got back to Chicago, Wright took him to the Coonley House, took him to the Roby House, and shared more experiences from his past with Mies van der Rohe. Next, please. Wright designed the first Usonian house in Madison, Wisconsin, the Jacobs House, and it was, along with many others, was enormously impactful on the architects of Chicago, even though only a couple of houses were built, modeled after this Usonian ideas. Usoni was a play on United States, and what Wright really wanted to do was create an affordable house, and he designed this 1,500 square foot house with basically open windows to the rear, where you could experience the backyard, yet rather private from the front. and echoing the horizontality of our native landscape, and all the kinds of ideas we come to associate with Wright. Built-ins, natural materials, those are the things that characterized these Usonian houses that were built all over the country. Next, please. Interestingly, the one of the two houses that he built, designed in the Chicago area, was a farmhouse, and it had to, as you can see from the barn in the background, it had to accommodate farmhands and their meals and their daily life and their work on the farm, in addition to provide a home for their family. And I want to mention, because I think it's really interesting, that it's been restored by their granddaughter and her husband, and is open by appointment for visiting. And I encourage everybody to see this wonderful restored Usonian farmhouse. Next, please. And the other house that was designed in this area as a Usonian was the Catherine Dougherty and Lloyd Lewis house. He was a noted journalist, highly respected, a friend of Frank Lloyd Wright's. It echoes its location on the Des Plaines River, and like Wright houses of the period, the exterior and the interior are blurred. He does wonderful things with projecting balconies and roof lines that are punctured, and it creates a beautiful composition in wood and glass on the Des Plaines River, which unfortunately suffers the same challenges as the Farnsworth house, which is prone to flooding. Next, please. The interesting thing about what we were doing is many of these clients were the architects they chose were either architects of note who are not necessarily known for their residential architecture, like Bud Goldberg and Michelangelo showed you the house in Blue Island that he designed, or there are houses in our book by architects that are not household names. And one of those is William Decknatel, who did design the house for Walter Kohler in Kohler, Wisconsin. He was a governor of Illinois, and yes, the bathroom fixture family. And this house is built on property that Daniel Burnham owned in Evanston, faces the street. And it was designed for a very significant professor at Northwestern, and designed carefully so that the professor could have his students visit it for office hours, and yet did not have to enter the house. The house, next slide, please. The house has a gracious, beautiful garden at the back, and with these interesting windows that open, that fit into each other and open to give full light and air to the interior. And you see the Usonian characteristics again with the layered roof lines. And in this case, and in many, it's a composition of both international style and prairie style. Decknatel, interestingly enough, was a member of the first College of Fellows at Taliesin, and also studied in Europe with Lursas. So you can tell that he has combined these two movements, Wrightian and international style. Next, please. In 1984, there was an exhibition at the Graham Foundation on Paul Schweiker and on William Decknatel. And I want to give a special shout out to Betty Blum, because without Betty, who wrote this along with John Zukowski, the catalog for the exhibition, our work would have been infinitely more difficult. Her oral history program laid the groundwork for primary research for scholars all over the world who are interested in Chicago architecture. And Betty, with a big hug, we thank you a lot for your work. Next, please. The Schweiker house, I put the phone number in there because I want you to call and go visit. It was a house that Paul Schweiker built in what was then Rochelle, Illinois. He had a commission for a barn next door, and in exchange for land, he designed his home and studio there. And this marvelous entrance from a long road and then a carport and then a path with his studio on the left and the house on the right to a beautiful Franz Lipp garden. Next, please. He was a huge admirer of Wright. He respected, admired him, knew his work, and you can see the broad overhangs, the board and batten redwood siding. I think they have the same difficulty with woodpeckers as we do on our redwood house, but it's a fabulous place, and I urge you to call Todd Wenger and go visit. Next, please. So what do we see that's Wrightian in it? The fluidity of interior and exterior spaces. So the brick path leading to the entrance of the house and the studio moves right into the interior of the house, so the flooring is the same. And the spatial progression is what Wright would have done in terms of entering a very compressed, low, comfortable space and then opening up into this fantastic living room with a prominent fireplace that was typical in Wright houses and those houses influenced by Wright. Again, the beautiful, soft Chicago brick and use of wood, and it's a warm, cozy, comfortable space. A favorite detail of mine is that vertical sliver of light over the built-in sofa at the end of the room. Next, please. And he was playing around with solar energy too, so that this broad overhang that I showed you earlier in the Schweiker's bedroom allowed the winter sun to flood the room with light. Next, please. And the studio, which was added to, we've got these gorgeous, again, Hedrick Blessing photographs, the studio that was added to later. This is where people trained, like Ralph Rapson, we have a house featuring a house by him in the book, Bud Goldberg, I.W. Colburn, Ed Dart. So many of the people that went on to make a great mark in their own right worked originally for Paul Schweiker. Next, please. And finally, you know, it's interesting because it was a challenge finding a woman modernist. And the cartoon, I have to read it to you. Why, yes, this is from the Progressive Architecture of March 1977, when there was this architectural exhibit of women architects that traveled the country, and it was to great acclaim. And at the same time in Chicago, I had the privilege of working on an exhibit of Chicago architects. So this is one of my favorites. Why, yes, I'm a little homemaker. I'm in the construction business and I build small homes. So, and Jeanne Wareheim designed this house for the Schobloms in Lamont. She designed over 150 houses in the Chicago area and is especially made a mark on a cooperative area in Lombard, where she designed several houses. Next, please. And this is the interior, which is really quite stunning, using natural materials. And you could see how the house itself extends into the landscape, a significant fireplace, and it has an atrium with palm trees, you know, so in these photographs. So she designed several modern houses and deserves a huge amount of credit. Next, please. And finally, this is our home. And unlike Michelangelo and Serge, we're doing remedial work. We've lived here 40 years and made all the major changes many years ago, but we love it. I consider it sort of a transitional house with its rather traditional form and yet corner windows and natural materials. And it's a home we love and we love to share with people. We had the privilege of knowing Larry Perkins, who would come over and we'd listen to Bach and we'd have wine and enjoyed his presence. And we loved the fact that he loved this house, and because we love it 40 years later, and it's our hope to see it preserved. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoy our book. We had fun writing it. We had fun researching it, and we're having fun sharing it with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan, for that, and Michelangelo. I'm going to ask a couple of questions to our special guests, Jeanne and Margaret, and then we'll return to Susan and Michelangelo for a few questions after that. And then for those of you who are in the audience, the 260 plus of you out there, we'll open it up, and Michael Wood will entertain questions from the audience. You should feel free, if you'd like to now, you can enter them in the chat function, and Woody can see them there, or you can later on raise your hand, or there's also a Q&A tab that we can access as well. So if you want to start thinking about those now, that would just be great. Let me start again alphabetically. I'll start with Margaret and ask you, Margaret, do you have any particular special memory from living in that house? Is there something memorable about the architecture that stays with you today?
Well, remember, having seen me on my pony, that we moved out of the house when I was 12 years old. So my memories are colored by my age in the house. And it was a wonderful house when I was very young. It also had my grandmother and a nurse to look after her. And so for a small house, it fit all of us in very elegantly. My father had his office there. It was an open plan, so we could run around and chase each other. But especially, and I was talking to my sister Marion, who's also an architect, last night, and she has a better memory than I did. And she said, remember, Margaret, our bedroom had a Pope's window in it, and it overlooked the outdoor porch that had a glass roof with struts, of course, and supports for the glass. And that when I was reprimanded, which happened often because I was a rather adventuresome child, I would open the Hope's window and pop out onto the glass roof and carefully meander over the struts. And there was a tree nearby, and I'd go down the tree and onto the chain link fence and escape. And poor Marion, as my younger sister, would follow me because she said otherwise she would have to tell on me, and she didn't want to do that. So it was an adventuresome house in that respect. The sleeping porch, which it had, which is an old-fashioned idea for a modern house. It also had a laundry chute where we used to hide the silver before we went on our trips, and I was in charge of hiding the silver in the laundry chute in the basement. And when it rained, unfortunately, the porch used to flood, and we would all be out there with bailing buckets, bailing out the porch. So there were many wonderful childhood memories in this house.
And Jeanne, I'm going to turn it to you. We saw a picture. Margaret's house was sort of front and center in the house, or in the frame. There wasn't much context in that particular picture, but in yours, there's a little bit of context. And we can see that the house definitely does not look like the building next door. So I wonder if there's something of that stays with you today about being the little girl in the odd flat roof house. You're on mute. You're on mute. There we go.
That's a perfect segue, Reed, to talk about really how I felt about the house, because the number one thing about growing up, and I think we moved into that house when I was about 3.5 years old. I remember celebrating my 4th birthday there. It was unlike any other house I had visited and been to and had seen before, both the facade and inside of the house. It was an extremely unusual house. And I remember as a kid wondering why people often drove so slowly on the street as they passed our house, because it was on the south side of Chicago. And although my father did eventually go on to do a couple of other homes that were similar in nature to our house, on the south side, ours was unique and it was ours. But it was not just that it was different than everything else on the South Side, it was the detail. And I think that my father concentrated on details that to me were a wonder, honestly. The interior of the house, it was an austere house, decorated in, there was no clutter, it was just a very, with 3 kids, I have to applaud my mother. It was always a together, clean home that was open, a small house, but there were things in the house that I just didn't see anywhere else. And my brothers and I shared one large bedroom that was actually divided by an accordion door. And that became quite a wonderful, it was always closed, but it was a wonderful thing that I think they probably replaced it many times when we were kids, because we thought that was some kind of a magical thing, this accordion door. But my father had interesting details in the closets, floor to ceiling doors inside of the house. He had a stereo unit that was built in to the cinder block walls on the interior of the house. And this stereo unit was always a wonder to me, because we didn't have a color TV. I'm really dating myself, when I was a kid. And so we do things by sitting around in the living room and listen to the radio together as a family. So, the way that the house was designed, it was very family oriented. He had, I often thought about the big picture windows that were in the house. And you would think that you would be concerned about privacy, but because the houses were very close together on the South Side. But my father, by the entrance, which was a side entrance to the house, and Susan and Michelangelo included a picture of the front and side of the house, which you would be able to see in the book. My father used a blasted glass that was opaque, and you could not see into the house, but you still kept the integrity of the design of the house, and it had the privacy as well. And that was a magical thing to me. Lots of magical, there is one thing that I remember as a child that I absolutely loved. The radiant heat in the floors. I just thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread. So these were the things that my father, all those little details, which as a child, I didn't understand really what they meant in the terms of a mid-century home, but they were magical to me. And they were magical in my neighborhood. Everyone always wanted to come over and visit. And I had friends that lived in Hyde Park who had color television. Yeah, everybody wanted to come to my house as a childhood memory. We hosted a lot. My mother hosted a lot. She was an interior designer. There was one detail that I wanted to mention as well. And I mention it because it was one of my responsibilities as a kid growing up, to dust off the single wooden shelf that was against the wall in the living room. And again, very isolated and austere, that held a few treasures on it. And it was my responsibility to keep it clean and the treasures on it, which was pretty risky to ask a young child to do, but proof that I looked after them. Here's a vase that was on that shelf that I thought as a child was the most beautiful thing. All of these special, done by Erickson is the name on the bottom, but I just thought it was such a magical thing. So I think that growing up in that house gave me a great appreciation for light, understanding light, because of all the windows. my father had these louvered slats beneath the picture windows with a wooden door that you could open to allow air to flow in and out of the house. And of course, it was all a wonder to me, but his interpretation of mid-century architecture, as I have grown and understood what it meant to grow up in a house like that, has stayed with me my entire life. And listening to Susan and listening to Michelangelo gives me an even greater appreciation of my father's skills. Even though as a 5-year-old, standing at the foot of his drafting table for a long time, he had a studio in the house. I was just amazed watching him work at his drafting table, to now understanding what it all meant and how it has all come together. And of course, the name Mies van der Rohe was always mentioned in my house growing up.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's a great answer. I love that it weaves back and forth between finished details and then mechanical details, and with equal fascination for both. That's your father is smiling at this moment.
I hope so. He loved Chicago dearly. And like Margaret, I left my home when I was 18 years old. So I was there quite a long time. I believe Margaret said she left when she was 10. So I remember it well.
Excellent. And Margaret, do you think that the house had any influence on you becoming an architect, or do you think that was just in the blood, given that your father and your sister also are architects?
No, well, I think certainly there were elements in the house that I remember fondly and reuse. The glass block, for example, the wonderful quality of light that came through. I've used it in 3 or 4 different houses in many different ways. So that certainly stayed with me. The open plan, the idea that as a child, we could really scamper around the house and had special moments in it. We could sit on the curved stair and listen to our parents invite friends over and sort of snoop on their talk and things. So in the houses that I've designed, I always have a special place for children, whether it's an overlook of the living room in the house that I did in Harbor Country, where the children's bedrooms actually have windows that overlook the double height space, or remodeling an old farmhouse. We put in a secret way that kids could go out a window onto a deck and then into a little playhouse that was in the pitched roof of the master bedroom, and that was a hideout for them. So I think enjoying this house that, we could scamper around, it was a really wonderful experience to do that. We had so many fun memories of that house that my dad was always a little worried. It's in the blood, but I think he also thought that being a teacher was in the blood. And so he just wasn't too sure that life as an architect was going to work for a woman. So as I mentioned very earlier, I was a rather adventurous child. And when I was reprimanded, I would go out the window, which I continued to do when we moved to Lake Forest if I was sent to my room. And so I went against the grain and became an architect anyway, jumping over walls and doing whatever it took to get wherever we are now. So yeah, he took me on job sites when I was a kid. And I used to go around, if there was a new house in the neighborhood, I would climb up, into the rafters and swing from them. And the smell of sawdust and building was just in the blood. So.
Jeannie, let me give you the last word on this. We kind of already know the answer based on the photograph we've seen, but whether you think real briefly, because we're tight on time, do you think that the house formed any of the kind of proto-photography direction for you?
I think that there's no question. photography was an outgrowth of my experience as a child. And I started in art school when I was 8 years old. So I always had that sense of what I wanted to do. But when I was about 19, I started making photographs and decided I wanted to do fine art photography. And I think most of it comes from the light that came into my house as a child. There was so much of it, but also the way the light entered the house. How it defined space in the house, how it defined objects like the vase that I just showed you. It created a way of vision for me that took me off into art school in New York City and has kept me on the same path ever since. So there's absolutely no question about it.
Fantastic. Thank you both for those questions. We appreciate that. And I'm going to direct a quick question to Susan and another one to Michelangelo right after that. Susan,
Yeah.
you know, books are big things. I mean, it's not every day you got a Margaret and a Jeanne running around to help fill in the gaps for you. Were there any specific or particular challenges other than the normal challenges of writing a book? Was there anything specific that came up in putting this one together that you think helped shape the final product?
Well, you mentioned, yeah, I'll address that, but I do want to point out one thing, and that is, given that we're writing about modern houses, I knew a lot of the owners. You know, I knew Fran and Ben Rose. They were friends. And, you know, to be able to have a relationship. I mean, I used to take Fran out to dinner when she went after Ben died. And I'm only sorry I didn't take notes, but she was my friend. You know, I didn't think I needed to sit and take notes. But it is lovely to be able to have lunch with the Helstein's daughter. Bud Goldberg designed the Helstein house. You know, and Paul and Margaret Lurie are very good friends of ours. So, you know, it made this a much warmer, friendlier, and more fun job than, you know, digging into the past and only looking at books. But to answer your question about challenges, I just had to get that in because it's so special. I think the great challenge is we have a wealth of riches in Chicago. You know, we've got so many great modern buildings, houses in particular that fly under the radar screen, you know, so it was challenging to make a selection. Sometimes the selection was made for us. I couldn't find images of Edward Humrich's houses. They're fabulous, you know. Couldn't find the records for Tony Grunsfeld until I took a picture myself, you know, in one of the houses. So, you know, the challenges were such that it would be lovely to do a volume too, because there is so much that is so good. And we hope that other researchers will dig in and follow in our footsteps and do work and expose the public to these beautiful and significant houses, and that will lead to their preservation.
I think a second volume is always in order. You know, it's modernism is a rough path for architects to follow. And it just never had, for many people, just didn't have the same appeal of more traditional typologies and languages. And especially now, as those houses are reaching a stage where they are becoming historic objects in and of themselves, this kind of treatment only helps demonstrate that they are valuable and that they are considered to be significant pieces of architecture and art. And so we all thank you for doing that in the book. Michelangelo, let me throw something out at you. I mean, the conversation I'm having with Susan right now talks about the possibility that instead of this book being directed at a professional audience only, or an audience of insiders, that you might, in another kind of writing, as a historian and a researcher, aim toward engaging. Did you have other audiences in mind while you and Susan were putting this book together? And you're on mute, so don't forget to turn that off. Did you have other audiences in mind while you and Susan were working on this book?
Absolutely, and I think that was also the attraction to collaborating with Susan. She came with a lot more hands-on experience within the realm of preservation, and I was just ivory tower academic that had written for a more specialized audience. And so what I really learned from this process is, and that's why I made a point of thanking homeowners, that basically we are all in this together, in the sense that, and it's not just domestic architecture, all forms. You have to have people that are committed, that work with professionals, and also sort of collectively protect these buildings. And so I think I would say a combination of, for the ideal readers, well, first off, we'd love the world to buy it so we get lots of royalties. But in general, we also want this to be useful to homeowners, give them a sense, also a pat on the back to say, keep up the good work, keep up all the sacrifices that are involved in financial, time-wise, to doing things right instead of demolishing the buildings. So we're trying here to encourage people, and also, scholarship. Susan mentioned Betty Bloom. Well, were it not for that oral history project, there's so much work that has yet to be done. Like, there's no monograph on Elting and Schweiker. There's so many other very talented architects that we have just sort of scratched the surface with. And so that part is hugely important. So I hope we can be a catalyst. And, I'm a relatively newcomer to Chicago. And so this has been an amazing, eye-opening experience. But so we want generalists and specialists all in the same room, preferably Crown Hall, talking together.
That's great. I'd like to just ask each of you one more final question. And your answer has to just be a sentence or two, because we want to stay in our time zone and give timeline and give the audience a chance to talk now. Tell us, each of you, let's start with Michelangelo. Did you find any kind of wonderfully interesting discovery, some little magic thing that you found when doing this research that just made you smile or shocked you? Anything like that?
Well, okay, so as a newcomer, when I thought Chicago, I just thought Chicago. I had no idea there was a North Shore, there was a western suburbs, and there was a South Side. The kind of generic Chicago. And so through the sort of research, sort of visiting, I just discovered what a rich collection of sort of 19th century towns and villages that sort of held all these jewels. And so that this discovery was Chicagoland is this really much more complex entity that we understand from the outside. So that was one of them. And then I guess, the greatest discovery is that to the critics that, and I'm saying this as someone that teaches at IIT, to the critics that said, the graduates were coming out with, cookie cutter, they all look like made at IIT. What I saw, and I showed some of the examples here this evening, is that there was a lot of real, variation and experimentation within the sort of, fairly limited palette. And so I think that's very interesting. The Liao House in pre-stressed concrete, this little classical temple with a kind of muscular quality to it. Discovering all the variety, I think, was what really made me, what surprised me and encouraged me that you can have a very kind of sort of disciplined curriculum, but that can generate different expressions beyond that.
Terrific. Thank you, Michelangelo. Susan.
Oh, well, I have a different kind of an answer because I've had the passion to write about this subject since 1976. I would like to tell you I was 3 years old, but that's not the case. When I did research for an exhibition on modernism, it was Jim Nagel's idea, and go do it. We got a grant from the Illinois Arts Council and put together a traveling exhibition till the cardboard mountings finally fell apart. And from then on, and then we bought our house by Larry Perkins, and then he loved that we loved the house. And I think the magic for me is that other people are turned on by it too, you know, and that matters to me. I've been doing this a long time. And so when I see the look in people's eyes that they are delighted by these houses, that they think they're beautiful, they think they're significant, they think what we're doing by writing a book about them is special. And that's the magic for me, is that it makes people happy and it turns them on to some new ideas.
That's terrific. I am delighted. Thank you so much, Susan and Michelangelo and Jeannie and Margaret for your input on this. And what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Michael Wood to see if we've got some questions. We are just a couple of minutes behind schedule. We thought we would go tonight till maybe about 6:45. And that gives us time for a few questions. And I know we've gotten some coming in, Woody, so away to you.
I got some instructions here about how long. We should take 6-7 minutes here. And so Susan and Michelangelo, they break into a couple of categories. The first is to expound upon the idea of modern in the middle, and maybe talk a bit about what you think the value is beyond Mies and Wright when we think about all of these great people from Goldberg to Schweiker and those that don't maybe get their full due. You talked a little bit about variety, Michelangelo, but people are wondering, why is it so useful to explore these architects that are fabulous, but maybe not iconic in the way that Wright or Mies is?
Would you like me to answer, or Susan?
Why don't you take a first stab, Michael?
Okay. So it also addresses the role, historiography. Like, we all know that collectively it takes more than two people to write history, right? So this kind of focusing on, kind of the masters, or, we don't use these terms anymore, I think tends to obscure the fact that generations take ideas, they re-elaborate them, they create new opportunities. So it's a much less elitist kind of proposition to see how the collective works to absorb and transform ideas of the modern. And what I've seen through my studies of modern architecture, and this is to go back to Reed saying that I've been a monster producing 4 books this year. One we did on Houston, and Rainer Banham said in a interview that outside of Chicago, Houston is the most Miesian city in America, because not only did Mies design 2 buildings, there was a number of architects that took Mies's cues and elaborated, including Howard Barnstone, which the book is about, and also Philip Johnson. So I think that each city, Houston, Chicago, Los Angeles, shout out to Alan Hess if he's on listening. Each city elaborated, took kind of universal language of modernism, and then tailored these ideas to site, to climate. And so again, I'm advocating, and Susan of course as well, before me, advocating for a kind of more ecumenical, sort of pluralist approach to writing history.
I think also that frequently, I'm just sort of extending what you said, Michelangelo, because we agree. but there are so many talented architects of all generations who have not received their due, and that was a major purpose of our book, was to give exposure to their talents. And we hope to see, more of that.
There's several questions here. Interested to know, particularly when we look in a more urban context, in a multi-family context, but still staying modern. They're talking about the Keck and Gottschalk House and some others. Does that fit into your view in the way you're espousing these buildings, or is it somehow different? So a lot of questions here. Interested to know how this is supported or breaks out when we're in more of an urban context.
Can I take a stab at this, Susan?
Go ahead.
So, okay, we focus on single family houses, but there is a critical juncture, and that critical juncture is in the 70s, mid 70s onwards, where a lot of folks are coming back to the city, and the type of great interest is the townhome. There was a series of exhibitions around, and a competition sponsored by the Graham around the townhome. And so you get, especially the Chicago 7 and the Chicago 11, the Stuart Cohens of the world, the Beebes of the world, the Nagels of the world, begin to design townhomes. And so there's a real, I think there's a real, talk about another book, the 75 onwards, there's this real interest by a number of architects that are not IIT grads that come in and start questioning the status quo. And so the townhome is very much important. And then one thing, the multiple, I see there's a question about these small scale but multifamily, there's a lot more research done, like Y.C. Wong is of course famous for the courtyard houses of Hyde Park, right? So I was really happy to find a single family home by Y.C. Wong. And so I think that, we had to, already it was very tough for Susan and I to, focus on 53 case studies and keep on the single family home. We were able to, through the CODA, put in, sort of touch upon the townhome debate and developments. But if we were going to also do lots of other stuff, we would have never gotten done. And as it was a challenge juggling.
I want to add one thing to that, Michelangelo. I think that, we're talking about city and suburbs. And on restricted land, you're going to see a different kind of home being constructed. And so, where there are dense situations, you're going to see townhouses. Walter Netsch did and others did some beautiful modern houses. But, especially with urban renewal of the 1960s in Hyde Park, there was land. And so there's I.M. Pei, there's Harry Weiss, there's Y.C. Wong. And so this is a housing type that, to focus a little more on the city, that would be a great project for somebody, because I would say the bulk of our houses tended to be where land was more available in the suburbs.
So I think I have to ask this question, I'm sorry, but this is to anyone. It says, do cats think mid-century modern houses? What do cats think of the mid-century lifestyle? Any first thoughts?
Well, I own 2 cats. Is anyone else in our panelists own cats?
I grew up in a mid-century house with cats.
And we had, when our kids were growing up, 4. Whoa. No, we had 2, because we started with 1, and then, somebody wanted another one. But they were happy campers. Okay, I'll give you a specific example, and you can enter in, Michelangelo. When we had, there was the bad news and the good news. The bad news was that the cat used to sit in that beautiful corner window, and another cat would come from the outside, an outside cat, and you go, like cats do. And the good news is the cat would lie under the piano or in the window and just snooze all day. So they were there with all this wonderful light and sunshine. we had very happy cats, except for when they saw another cat. Michelangelo?
Yeah, we had housebound cats that discovered when we were in Houston that discovered freedom in nature in Riverside. So constantly trying to dart out and get access to the grass that they never saw in Houston. So in addition to loving the Riverside's lush landscape, they also love the big windows that they can look out onto and catch the birds. So
I can also tell you that St. Bernards do particularly well in modern houses because of that open plan. It gives them room to hustle their bulk through the place without destroying too many vases like Jeannie would have been taken care of on her shelf.
I'm glad we can end on that. I'm being told in respect of time, we have to move on to the end. I will say I've been capturing the questions that haven't been answered. For sure, we need to get Lee Bay connected with Jeanne. So we'll take care of that offline. So people whose questions are not answered, we will take care of you. But it's my duty to call Cynthia Vranas-Olsen, our director of the Mies Society, for a few closing words and some upcoming news for the Society members.
Well, thank you, Michael. And to everyone, I want to thank all of you, Michelangelo and Susan, our special guests, Jeannie and Margaret McCurry, and of course, our moderator, Reed Kroloff. I want to acknowledge the strength in our partnership tonight. The Mies Society was thrilled to partner with the College of Architecture and the Chicago Architecture Center. And I'm so, so grateful for our Mies Society board, many of whom are out there tonight, and our members. In particular, Steve Weiss, our chair, who I wanted to mention had worked as on the Lurie House with Nagel and the Siegel Home with Booth. And so we're very proud of him for that. And Ed Pollack, our vice chair. Our advancement colleagues, I want to thank. This is where the Mies Society resides within IIT, the university. Ernie Eisenminger, Dia Marcano, our constituent engagement colleagues, and communications and events team. Meg, the woman behind the curtain tonight, just made this all happen beautifully. A very special guest who in the end, at the last moment, could not make it, Madame Phyllis Lambert, was trying to join us this evening. And Phyllis, our esteemed guest and alumna, her exhibitions and research continue to teach, inspire, and support us. And she regretted that she could not join us in the end. But I have a question, and I'll try to answer it. So why do we hold the book launch, all of us here tonight, in a very high on our list of priorities as a format? So in thinking about this and looking at this wonderful book, I realized that architectural knowledge passes through books into buildings and back. Books and buildings are quite obviously different in purpose and form, but they are also quite similar in many ways. Both are manifestos of specific knowledge that use materials available to construct meaning. Modern in the Middle demonstrates how an architectural book materializes knowledge specific to this field. And then we have a slide coming on. What does a page in this book feel like? The design matches the ideal of a modern society. The form is imbued within the book's content. The representation of the modern house is in harmony with the book's format as you flip through the pages. The sequence presents to the readers a clear and logical purpose, much like the structure in the modern architecture that you've witnessed tonight. Holding this book, I believe you'll feel the sensual tactile experience of materials. And yes, this bronze cast coffee table and wood bowl are by the hand of our late Jeanne Summers, alumnus COA, former dean of the College of Architecture, IIT, in the early 90s. Modern in the Middle has found an appropriate home here. And finally, in the chat, you will, thanks to Meg, you will find the link to the Mies Society's website and how to purchase and have your own signed copy of Modern in the Middle. The Mies Society promotes the preservation of Mies's modernist ideas, buildings here on IIT's campus, and celebrates the accomplishments of those, like Michelangelo and Susan, who have advanced his philosophies. We thank you all for being here with us tonight, and please have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good night,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you, Margaret and Jeannie, especially.
Good night.
Good night. Now the martinis can flow, or margaritas, or whatever is your predilection. And when COVID is behind us, we'll have you come to Crown Hall, and Reed will treat for drinks.
Sounds
Thank you
good.
all.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.